My name is Anna Allison, and my presentation is called Pesticides on Tap, the Pollution of the Central Valley. A lot of people don't understand that pesticides are a real problem that face the Central Valley. Because of its huge crop production, the Central Valley is particularly at risk for pesticides and the diseases caused by pesticides. Last year, Fresno County exported the most amount of crops in the entire state and dumped almost 200 million pounds of pesticides across those crops. Those pesticides then pollute the air, seep into the water, and get spread across our food. The reason this is such a problem is because it puts the residents of the Central Valley at a higher risk for cancer and other pesticides-related diseases. Since a lot of these people work and live in pesticides areas, they are constantly at risk for cancer and other diseases. The prevalence from farms is one of the biggest problems in the Central Valley. Elevated rates of leukemia, brain, and prostate cancer have been reported in the use of pesticide in pesticide areas. 25% of the Central Valley farm workers report a pesticide-related illness each year. This means that 25% of these people are being harmed in some way from pesticides in their daily working environment. They've discovered that people with long-term exposure to pesticides are 3 times more likely to get pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is a particularly deadly type of cancer because it's fast-moving and hard to treat. People who work and live near farms are particularly at risk for this because they breathe in pesticides every day. Prevalence in the Merced water is also an issue. New research has discovered that 75% of groundwater in the Central Valley has been contaminated with pesticides. 14% of those contaminated water areas show extreme toxicity. This means that the pesticide use has poisoned the water to a point where it's not only considered contaminated but extremely toxic. When an unincorporated housing survey asked people of one Merced County community whether or not they trusted the tap water they drank, 75% of these people said they did not, and 30% of the people believed that the water was contaminated in some way. This belief is backed up by research done from the health board in California. They said that there is a higher rate of arsenic in Merced water than is allowed by health code. While this water is still considered safe to drink, it's important to note that the arsenic is too high in the water. Arsenic can be known to cause cancer as well as organ system failure. On a related note, 18% of the algae species living in California's central groundwater has died out. This means these species living in those extremely toxic groundwater areas are dying out because of the suffocation of pesticides and other pollutions in the water. This is a graph of the water contamination in Merced, California. As you can see, the green area of the graph right here shows contaminated water. The blue part right here, that's clean drinking water in Merced, and the purple part right next to it shows areas of extreme toxicity. Overall, 75% of the water is contaminated, 14% is extremely contaminated, and only 25% of the water in Merced County is safe to drink. Population at risk. While everyone is at risk for cancer, there are certain people who are at a higher risk for cancer due to extreme exposure to pesticides. One of these groups is Hispanic men. Most farm workers in the Central Valley are Hispanic men, and they found that there are higher rates for leukemia, brain, and prostate cancer. The use of azatran and captan are pesticides known to cause these cancers. While they are considered legal by California and are often used on California crops, they are extremely toxic. They've done studies of Hispanic men in other areas of California, such as San Francisco, where there isn't a large pesticide use, and they didn't find any elevated risk for cancer. This means that these men are not naturally predisposed to cancer. It means that because of their working environment and because of the azotran and captan being spread across the crops, these people are more likely to get cancer. Additionally, a cohort study showed that Hispanic males who worked within 500 meters of farms showed a significantly higher rates for cancer. Now, what's really important about this statistic is that while it did focus on Hispanic men, it showed that people within 500 meters of farms showed significantly higher rates of cancer. Now, this could be anybody within 500 meters of farms. And in a location like California, being within 500 meters of a farm on a daily basis is a pretty standard thing. Another population at risk is children. Children showed significantly higher rates of leukemia with the pesticide Propagate. Now, this means that not only are Hispanic men and farm workers at risk for elevated rates of leukemia, but children as well. So children who grow up in the Central Valley are at a high exposure to cancer, and more so than other children living in other parts of the state. Now, there are 3 stakeholders in the California pesticide debate. The first one is the state of California itself. Now, California does a pretty good job regulating pesticide control. They're one of the few states that have a complete log of pesticides. But a few things they could do to improve this is to continue regulating the pesticides, as well as provide incentives for safe farming. Perhaps they could give tax breaks to farmers who use green types of pesticides that don't pollute the environment and don't cause cancer. But right now, they do have a stakehold in the pesticide debate, because the more crops the Central Valley produces, the bigger the output they have for not only the rest of the state, but the rest of the country. The second group who has a stakehold in this debate is Merced community. And the community as a whole should be concerned with the pesticide debate, because the more people who are sick in California, in Merced, the more people that need to be treated, and the less people there are to continue the labor force. And a few ways Merced community could improve the situation in pesticides is to follow the pesticide law, for one thing, because it is easy to ignore pesticide regulation, but it's really important they follow it, to the letter, and make sure that the farms in the community are doing what they should. The second thing they could do as a whole is to make sure they provide a safe environment for workers on farms, and that would mean all the farms make sure that they provide the safest environment they can for their workers and families, and it's really within their best interest to make sure people who run their farms are not getting sick. And additionally, the Merced community could make a bigger effort to protect groundwater, because one of the biggest biggest ways people are exposed to cancer is through water and through the drinking water. And right now, a huge percent of the Merced community groundwater is contaminated. And while the water is considered drinkable by the state of California, I, for one, believe that the people in Merced community would want the water to be more than just barely drinkable. And that belief is reflected in the unincorporated housing survey, when 75% of people said they wouldn't drink Merced water, and 30% believed it was contaminated beyond the point of being safe to drink. The third group with the stakeholder in the pesticide debate is individuals. And individuals can do some things to protect themselves from pesticide exposure, such as filtering their tap water, and they can also monitor their children's exposure. That means they can try and prevent their kids from being unnecessarily exposed. Like, they cannot use pesticides at their home garden, or they can petition that their school doesn't use pesticides as well. So as a whole, everybody has some kind of stakehold in the pesticide debate, and it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that pesticides exposure is limited in the Central Valley. Modifiable behaviors. Okay, there are a lot of studies that illustrate illustrate that the behavior is modifiable to limit pesticide exposure. Now, like I said before, 25% of Central Valley farm workers reported a pesticide-related illness last year. And this study was done by Mills in 2010. And this study illustrated the need to monitor personal exposure. And while there is a big incentive to work too many hours in environmentally unsafe conditions, people need to realize that overexposure to pesticides on a daily basis will cause illness for the most part, and they need to make sure that they're not working incredibly long hours breathing in pesticides every second of every day. And the second modifiable behavior was proven in a study by Ward and Zom in 2000, and this showed that children are exposed to chemicals outside the home, inside the home, and at school. And children exposed to pesticides are more likely to get pancreatic cancer as well as leukemia. And this essentially shows that people need to cut back where they can on pesticide use. So home gardens probably don't need to use intense pesticides, and neither does the school. So I think it's just important that people use pesticides sparingly if they have to. Why is all this important? The reason this is so important to people in the Central Valley is because pesticides are strong carcinogenic chemicals that are sprayed across our food, seep into the drinking water, and poison the air. Merced community needs to do something about this threat, since the Central Valley residents are at the highest risk for cancer and pesticide-related illness in California. Now, they may be at the highest risk of cancer related to pesticides in the country, because California produces the most crops and spray the most pesticides. So this is an issue that's going to affect everyone in the Central Valley. Like old people, young people, people of every race is going to be affected by this. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. These are my resources cited, and these were also the resources used to write my paper. Okay, thank you.